Hi, welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. During my research, I unearthed lots of intriguing facts that aren't necessarily included in my books. So I've created this channel to share the information with you. If you can't tell by my bonnet today, I'm going to be discussing the 1870s, specifically the Oregon Trail, a 2,170-mile east to west wagon route and immigrant trail in the U.S. that connected the Missouri River Valley to valleys in Oregon. The eastern part of the trail spanned part of what's now Kansas and nearly all of the area that's Nebraska and Wyoming, and the western half of the trail spans most of what the current states of Idaho and Oregon. Until I began my research, I thought the trail was created for the express purpose of getting settlers to the Western Territories. Boy, was I wrong. The history reaches further back. After the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, President Jefferson tasked Meriwether Lewis with exploring the Missouri River and, quote-unquote, such principal stream of it as by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean, whether the Columbia, Oregon, Colorado, and or other river may offer the most direct and practicable water communication across this continent for the purposes of commerce. Spoiler alert, with his partner William Clark, Lewis did find a path to the Pacific Ocean, but it would be more than 50 years before a direct and practical route called the Mullen Road will connect the Missouri and Columbia rivers. Lewis and Clark mapped the first land route across the United States between 1804 and 1806, but the passes that went through the Rocky Mountains, Lemhi Pass and Lolo Pass, were much too difficult for the prairie schooner wagons to use. On the return trip, they continued to search for paths with traversable terrain, but unfortunately the shorter, faster route was controlled by the Blackfoot tribes. The expedition mapped both the Platte and the Snake rivers that bookended the Oregon Trail across the Continental Divide, but they had yet to locate the South Pass or some of the interconnecting valleys that were later used. Instead, it would be John Jacob Astor and his fur business that would create the Oregon Trail. Born Johann Jacob Astor in 1763 near Heidelberg, Germany, he was the youngest of 4 boys. As a youngster, he worked in his father's butcher shop and as a dairy salesman, but he moved to London to work for his uncle's piano and flute manufacturing company. While he was there, he learned English and anglicized his name to John Jacob Astor. At the end of the American Revolution, he immigrated to the U.S. to join his brother, who had established a butcher shop in New York City. However, during the voyage across from England, he met a fur trader who convinced him to join the trade. A savvy young man, while working at his brother's shop, he purchased raw hides from the Native Americans, prepared them himself, and then sold them to England and elsewhere at a huge profit. By the late 1870s, he opened his own fur shop and then served as an agent for his uncle's musical business. In 1794, he took advantage of the Jay Treaty between Great Britain and the U.S., which opened new markets to Canada and the Great Lakes region. He went to London and made a contract with the Northwest Company, who was a competitor of Hudson's Bay Company. He then imported furs from Montreal to New York and then shipped them to Europe. By 1800, he was one of the leading figures in the fur trade and had amassed nearly $250,000, which is the equivalent of $6 million in 2020. He also traded furs, teas, and sandalwood with China, making even more money for himself. Continuing to do well in the industry, Astor founded a subsidiary of his American Fur Company that operated in the Pacific Northwest. He sent 2 expeditions to the Columbia River, one by ship and one by land. They wanted to find possible supply routes and trapping territories. After the ship arrived and delivered its supplies, the men stayed to construct Fort Astoria. However, relations with the Native Americans were not good because one of his staff insulted the elder that had been elected by the natives to negotiate pricing for the pelts. All the while that this was happening, the overland group had found a somewhat decent route until they came up against steep canyons, waterfalls, and unpassable rapids. So they cached their goods and walked the rest of the way to the river, where they made dugout canoes and then traveled to Fort Astoria. However, their experience showed that pack trains could get through, and perhaps wagons after some improvements. Years passed. The trappers' use of the rope forged what was used finally in 1836 by the first migrant wagon train. Organized in Independence, Missouri, the trail had been cleared all the way to Fort Hall, Idaho. More time passed, and the trails were cleared increasingly farther west, and eventually reached the Willamette Valley in Oregon. Bridges, cutoffs, ferries, and roads were added and improved that made the trip faster and safer. Starting points were located in Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska, with routes converging along the lower Platte River Valley near Fort Kearney, Nebraska. From that first migrant train in 1836 through 1869, the Oregon Trail and its many offshoots were used by about 400,000 settlers, farmers, miners, ranchers, and business owners. The eastern half of the trail was also used by travelers on the California Trail, the Mormon Trail, and the Bozeman Trail, before turning off on their separate destinations. Offshoots of the trail continued to grow as gold and silver discoveries, farming, lumbering, ranching, and business opportunities resulted in much more traffic. Traffic eventually became two-directional as towns were established along the trail. By 1870, the population in the states served by the Oregon Trail had increased by over 350,000 over the 1860 census level. With the exception of most of the 180,000 population increase in California, most of these people living away from the coast traveled over parts of the Oregon Trail to get to their new residences. Even before the famous Texas cattle drives after the Civil War, the trail was being used to drive hundreds of thousands of cattle, horses, sheep, and goats from the Midwest to the various towns and cities along the trails. In 1852, there were even records of a 1,500 turkey drive from Illinois to California. The main reason for the livestock traffic was the large cost discrepancy between livestock in the Midwest and at the end of the trail in California, Oregon, or Montana. Livestock could often be bought in the Midwest for a third to a tenth of what they would fetch at the end of the trail. Large losses could even occur, and the drovers would still make a significant profit. As the immigrant travel on the trail declined in later years, and after livestock ranches were established at many of the places along the trail, large herds of animals often were driven along part of the trail to get to and from the markets. The cost of traveling over the Oregon Trail and its extensions varied from nothing to a few $100s per person. Individuals buying most of the needed items would end up spending between $150 to $200 per person. As the trail matured, additional costs for ferries and tolls were thought to have been about $30 per wagon. After the completion of the first transcontinental railroad, the trip became even faster, cheaper, and safer, and usage of the Oregon Trail declined. Thanks for watching this Moments in History. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like even more history, please stop by my blog that's located on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And if you'd like to watch additional episodes of Moments in History, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon to receive notification of episodes that are uploaded generally every second and fourth Fridays of the month. Thanks for watching, and have a great rest of your week.